Hello and welcome everyone to our third Diverse webinar. I'm Catherine Knodel, the Western Project Coordinator for the Diverse Project. Before we get started, I just want to start off with a land acknowledgement. The University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. So today we will be hearing from Dr. Harry Nelson. He's an associate professor at the University of British Columbia. His long-term research interest is in analyzing natural and environmental resource policy with an emphasis on forestry and in developing new policy options that can help enhance the long-run sustainability of Canadian forests and the communities and businesses that rely upon them. He is currently investigating what role ecosystem services could provide as an alternative business model for Indigenous groups managing forest lands in BC. Harry also continues to work on assessing the impact of climate change on how we manage our forests and exploring adaptation options. So from here, I'm going to let Harry take it over and share more about theme 5 of the Diverse Project. So go ahead, Harry.
Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna have to update that bio. I'm sorry, Catherine, but and again, just to continue on, sitting out here, I'm on the West Coast at UBC, so you'd extend that land acknowledgement to the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish as well. And I just note, I'm not quite sure why I'm webinar 3 for theme 5, but we'll try and keep that straight, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what it is we're up to in theme 5. And some of you may be more familiar with it and others maybe not. So with that, we bring up the PowerPoint. And just to give people some sense of an expectation for what I'm going to give you, not all the slides are going to be this busy. That said, some slides have a fair bit of text, and I was just reading something this morning, which was a reminder to, if you're a presenter, people can either listen or read, can't do both. So when I get to those slides, I'm just going to be quiet to give you a minute or two to read the slide. Then I'll kind of speak to the point I want to make about that slide. And I'm kind of anticipating we should wrap up by about 35 to 40 past the hour, leaving time for questions. That said, if at some point there's something that's puzzling you, just, I guess, either pop it in the chat. I don't know whether that's turned off or on, Catherine, or please let me know. And at the end, we're always happy to answer questions, myself, the others in theme 5. So feel free to email me and follow up. And I neglected to add my email to the end, but I'm pretty sure that you can find that. You can definitely get that from Catherine or Madeline. And again, I think one of the things that excites us about the project, I think everybody's involved here, is both the idea of like, what does this mean to sort of think about how we could think about forests differently, and the diversity of organizations and places and everything else that kind of you see reflected in this kind of cover slide. The theme 5 webinar, again, I'm assuming most are familiar, but the Diverse Project is organized into 6 different themes. I am the theme leader for theme 5, which deals with the social and the economic and the governance aspects of the kind of questions that are being tackled through the Diverse Project. I'd like to acknowledge, one of the really great things is I've had a chance to start working with people that I've worked with before, others I haven't. This is a list of the current kind of researchers that are active and involved in theme 5. My apologies to everybody for that graphic where I tried to plop stars where you are. It was a last minute thing and it needs some work, but I will talk with Madeline and Catherine about trying to fix that. You'll see there's a lot of folks out in Ontario, Quebec, Ryan's in Winnipeg. And then there's a little cluster of us out here on the West Coast. I'd note that there's others that are connected in the different themes. Christian through theme 4, Olivier through theme 2. And we'll sort of touch on how we're starting to think through how the various themes sort of connect across one another. Because there's sort of what you write in the proposal, and then as you actually start to get down and start to think about how you're doing it, how that, that you really start to get into the practicality of what it is, how you're going to achieve kind of what you intend to do. And, there's a kind of yeah. Anyway, I think it's been fascinating. Can't speak too much of the details now, but I'll speak to it more. That's something that we're working on. There is going to be an upcoming fact sheet that sort of is where you can go to as kind of a, quick look, a summary of what it is we're up to. In there, among other things, you'll see the goals and objectives where we're trying to kind of distill down what's in the larger proposal about what it is we're going to do. And again, I leave it to the other themes to speak in more detail, as to kind of defining what climate smart forestry might look like, functional complex network idea. And again, not listed here, but it's sort of our current approach, which, in economic terms, we sort of call usually a business as usual approach. And the idea is, much like the modeling and the other activities going to take place, what happens if we keep doing the same things? What if we do something different? And what we're really looking at from kind of like the institutional side, and the institutional side to us reflects, all these things that are kind of intertwined. Kind of the economics, different models and different approaches, the kind of how we organize decision-making, the governance aspects, and kind of how that plays out politically and in society. And so what you have listed there touch on various aspects of thinking about what are the kind of things that one needs to think about, how this could unfold from that kind of social or institutional side. I just realized I started talking, even though I told you I'd let you read this. So I'll give you a minute or so, and then I'll go to the next slide. And again, happy to try and answer questions at any point, things that pop up now or at the end. And the other thing I should note is I think many of the other Theme 5 researchers are hopefully able to join us. And even if they can't participate directly, again, you may be able to kind of, you can point questions to them as well too. So one of the opportunities here is to start to think about bigger questions, because you need to understand how you're going to take this back. And I'm going to get to the practical reasons as to why I raise this. But at first, I'll let you read this, and then I'll talk to you about what's going on in that slide. And really what this slide is talking about is when we start thinking about our understanding of the complexity of the human side of how we organize things and how we think and how our knowledge and everything evolves, there's this additional challenge of how to kind of map it across to all these different aspects, these sort of inherent questions that forests pose to us, kind of some of the uncertainty around these ecological outcomes, the long time spans. And so it's challenging to sort of, in some sense, generalize across these sort of the ways in which we think about forestry. That doesn't mean it cannot be done, but just one of the things to understand that how social complexity is going to influence and affect how we're thinking about this and how we're going to approach it within theme 5 is you've got to be very careful because of this sort of fluidity, I guess for lack of a better word, or all the various ways in which the way a question gets asked can help determine the answer, bias in ways that people respond, a lack of knowledge and such. It means that, it's possible to ask a question about something and the sorry, so my email keeps dinging and I'm worried that something, no, sorry about that, Catherine. I was worried I was had inadvertently muted myself.
All good.
Oh no, it was just like terrifying for a second. I was like, so just to go back to this at the end, so just to be, we have to be aware if it can be problematic because depending kind of a researcher or somebody may come from a particular perspective and you can generate the kind of answer that you want. So this has been a larger issue in the social sciences. You may have seen this about being able to replicate answers. It is something to be aware of when we start to think about trying to think usefully and even pragmatically about the social side of these various alternative approaches to forest management. Now, this is coming up more, I think, as Hugh and I talk about the inherent uncertainty in some fundamental ways of introduced in part by the nature of these sort of evolving disturbances in ecosystems. Let's not even get with the uncertainty that we have around social systems and such. Witness and point, who knows what's going to happen on Monday. And so this kind of is a more focused on the economic aspect because that's something that Hugh and I are talking about, kind of what our area of theme 5 is looking at. And this describes how we're thinking about this. Again, I started talking, so I'm going to let you read this and I'll explain what that means. Essentially, this type of uncertainty, I like the way Hugh was trying to describe it to me at one point, and it was sort of the shape of that space or the shape of that uncertainty, the shape of that risk. It introduces a sort of it introduces a nonlinearity when we're trying to model it. And things like Bellman equations and typical approaches are to try and get rid of any nonlinearities and try and linearize everything. That's not really feasible or we think useful for doing this. And so the idea here that we've been talking about, just so you know, and again, this is a work in progress, is flip this around. And rather than trying to embrace in some ways the idea of what these risks are and ask this question instead. Again, I'll let you read this. That's a picture of the fires looking across from Kelowna. I think this was the 2003 fires, but Lord knows it could have been the more recent fires a few years ago. And the reason I offer this example is we did a project funded by the Adaptation Working Group and NRCan, the BC government and BC Wildfire Service to say, well, if this is the case, how could this work? That was the report that came out of it. And kind of, you can again read, sort of give some sense of the kind of questions that we think we can be able to answer this and do this in a useful way. and I will move on. Hopefully you've had a chance to read this. And so again, I think these ideas of social complexity and uncertainty are key things that we need to grapple with it within theme 5. We also need to think about how we link with the other themes to the extent that we share outputs with them. They provide inputs to us. In a narrow way, that example I just gave you, where we think about this sort of economic perspective and this risk return trade-off and how we might look at these interventions, we don't actually really have to use dollars. We may be able to use values or some other kind of metric that is important to people or communities, the actor, the organization. Again, at a kind of a higher level, as we're thinking about this at a kind of, I guess, a project level, on one side is Christian and the others are thinking about, what's the ecology and the science behind how these complex forest networks kind of fit together and how they operate. Well, how does that kind of join or fit or mesh with these sort of complex social and economic networks that we've developed? And this picture here, I think, tries to illustrate these fundamental things that we need to do as institutions or organizations. You need to make decisions, you need to get things done, you need to coordinate activities. And there are these sort of inherent trade-offs sometimes, especially in complex system. The more you try to control, the more challenging it gets to kind of coordinate. And this is a simple example with a crosscut saw. There's really only somebody's pushing, somebody's pulling. Simplifies the problem. And so I think that kind of, again, is something that we're sort of discussing and thinking about in theme 5 as you start to think about, like, what is it about these complex social networks and how this sort of knowledge, in part that's being generated elsewhere, can be used and used effectively. And my apologies, I realize I'm going through this much more quickly than I had thought. So this may be one of the shorter webinar presentations you get, but I'm happy to answer questions. Things have really started getting going in earnest, only I would say in the last few months. We've had the opportunity to have some meetings with partners both in Alberta and BC. We've had the chance to engage with Theme 6 in some of those meetings. Hugh and I went out and met with Brad in Alberta. I'd like to acknowledge that Lance over in Thunder Bay has taken the lead on developing checklists for the various case studies that different students are going to be using for their research, working with different partners, and has followed it up with developing a governance checklist for those folks that are going to be working on aspects of governance for theme 5. And those, I think we have to go back as our theme 5 group and kind of confirm those, but I think we're getting pretty close to having those ready to go. And some of the students are just getting going that are being funded through Diverse. I would anticipate, now that I think about it, I'm not going to go back and scroll back to that first slide, but Dieu merci with Jean-Francois and Guy has started already out at, pardon me, Dieu merci, I think you're at Laval and not at UQO. Tully here at UBC, even though she's here, she doesn't formally start on the project until fall 2025. And her response, Dieu merci, is looking at governance along with Guy and Jean-Francois. Tully will be looking at the provincial regulatory reviews, which is why I have down there starting in fall of 2025. And I guess my expectation is, again, because the work Lance has put in, we'll have these checklists kind of in hand for people as they get going, probably really on all aspects of this in September. I would expect that we'll have at least one more student joining us here out at UBC to start working on the economic pieces. Right now, In theme 5, we're talking among ourselves, what kind of inputs will be useful for the economic models coming from the other themes? What gaps can we identify between kind of what people are working on, what might be needed? Just spoken to the provincial regulatory reviews. Governance checklist has a bit more work to do. The case study checklist is getting pretty close. And again, we've been in conversations that there are other partners and researchers that are part of diverse that are have interest in the activities with theme 5, and I think we're going to become part of it, but I didn't want to start putting expectations on people until we figure that out. So those conversations are I'm hoping will get wrapped up in the next month or two or a few months, so we kind of sort of know who's who and who's working on what. And as you can imagine, that kind of goes back to looking at whether there may not be research, what kind of research gaps might exist and how those are going to be tackled. Example of some ongoing work. This is Beth Turner out at UQuam, who's been working with Atikamekw. Beth kindly shared this slide as an example of, in this case, working with that community to understand what the sort of their expectations, their values are, what they want to see in the future for that forest. And so in some ways, I think this is a good example of the kind of things I can see us doing in part, or at least some of the researchers in theme 5, as you sort of try and link together the kind of knowledge that's being generated elsewhere in the project with, in this case, what this community wants to see on their landscape. And again, Beth, I know if Beth, I can't remember if Beth was able to join us, but somebody you could certainly speak to try and understand more about this. This kind of goes back to the project deliverables. Let you read this, and I'll speak to it. Again, you'll see in there, we're trying to pull together the various aspects, different research, come up with I think different ways of conveying that information. For example,
okay, I found this on the web for different research, come up with different.
Sorry, Poland's trying to talk to me. And again, some of this reflects in part the nature of the different activities different researchers are taking within the project, where you might have case studies of particular places that highlight different aspects of either the institutions, governance works, maybe what needs to change around governance to enable something like functional complex networks. One of the things that the project gives us, which is sadly something we really don't have a lot of in Canada, is we're going to have a regulatory overview of kind of the current state of play for policies in each province about what we can and can't do with forest practices. And speaking personally as somebody that works on forest policy, that's great, because I always kind of wonder about that. Sort of know what goes on in BC, have some idea what goes elsewhere, but this will be, I think, nice to have a current up-to-date version of that. Again, this is all meant, there's both a scientific and a research component, but also a pragmatic in the sense of like, how does this help advance things? So there'll be guidance documents. Again, I think targeted to particular places and particular stakeholders that we'll be providing. And then, as always, we're academics, so we've got to get some publications out there to make ourselves feel good. And I think that's it. And apologies, I thought that was far shorter than I expected, but I was probably talking more than I needed to, and I should give you more time to read the slides.
All good, Harry. I'm sure everyone is happy to have a little bit of extra time at the end of their day, so.
You want me to keep talking? Okay.
If anyone has any questions for Harry, please put them in the chat. Or raise your hand if you'd prefer, and then I can enable you to speak any questions you might have. I'll give you guys a few minutes.
And I would say, again, just to emphasize, I'm more than happy. Email me directly. I can get back to you. Speaking on behalf, the Royal We for all the other Theme 5 researchers, I think they're equally happy to speak to what it is, their questions. And I didn't want to go into too many details about there because I would rather they present what they're doing rather than me kind of doing it on their behalf. But there may be an opportunity to do that in the future.
And one thing to note also, I did put Harry's email in the chat, so if you do want to email him, that's an option. I have 2 hands up now, so Gordon King, I'll let you talk first. I just allowed you to talk, so you can unmute.
Hi, it's Gordon King here in Timmins, part of Ontario MNR, Ministry of Natural Resources. My chat was disabled for some reason. Anyway, that's not the question. The question was, when this project started a couple of years ago, we set aside money in a budget, which is a multi-year budget for this, $5,000 per year. So I still have $15,000, but I don't really have a way of getting a contribution agreement or even who to make it with. And I know working with government is a pain in the ass, that we are difficult. If there's anything you can think of, anyone who's on any of the researchers in terms of how we could transfer money to you, and I'm not sure if 15,000 really is enough to make it worth your
Gordon, we're never gonna turn our nose up at money, and $15,000 can go a long way. I think the way, and again, I don't know if there's anybody here from the project leadership team, which would be Christian or Brad or Charles or Kevin, but that's kind of, or maybe Catherine and Madeline can speak to that. I mean, that's kind of, they're the ones that handle the financial end of things.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, I would point you to them, and I guess because Catherine and Madeline are on here right now, they can kind of relay that. We were actually having a meeting on Monday among all the theme leads, and so that could be something that's folded into that meeting.
Okay, yeah, if we don't have to talk about it here in detail, but if there's somebody who wants to reach out to me, my name is gordon.king@ontario.ca. And yeah, get back to me. And then we just have to work out the details. As I say, I've got the money sitting there, and I keep having to answer embarrassing questions about why I haven't dealt with this yet. So you would be somebody would take a lot of pain off me if I could.
Gordon, we'll happily solve it for you.
And I say, I do have to warning, I mean, working with government's a pain. We are difficult.
I'm going to remain silent at this point.
Yeah, no, it's fine. You don't have to say anything. I say this, the First Nations, working with First Nation. And by the way, the money is supposed to be used for something related to First Nation research, but anything in terms of the social science, which this is theme, is good. I just have to spin it the right direction. But working with First Nations, I tell them all the time, it's a pleasure working with them. Working with the government is a royal pain in the
Oddly enough, I am currently going to an industry conference right here and hear the same message from the forest sector out here.
Yeah, it is what it is. Anyway, that was all.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks for letting us know. I can already see there's some things in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. There was another hand up, you said, Catherine?
Yes. One moment. I'm just going to remove previous one. Okay. So I believe, yeah, Charles, go ahead and unmute. Ask your question.
Hi, Harry. Can you hear me?
Yes, Charles, I can.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for a really interesting talk this morning. Question isn't directly to what you presented in the slides, but I'm wondering, thinking about, the different governments that we have in different provinces, and, we may be looking at a shift in Canada more broadly overall. Ultimately, that trickles down to the, resources that we have to regulate, or people do in government. question being, is that a reflection of, how much people are thinking about forests, or, just some sort of thoughts on that side of things, like.
Oh, Charles, yeah, I'm not sure. I guess at this point, Charles, you're just gonna get an opinion. Not,
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for theme 5, and it is limited by the fact that I can only offer my perspective from BC right now.
That's
Because, and I mean, but I think this is one of the opportunities as we chat among ourselves in theme 5 to sort of see whether you're sort of seeing the same shift take place in Alberta and Saskatchewan and, Manitoba and, the rest of Ontario, Quebec, and maritime provinces. Definitely here in the last, I'd say 5 years, politically, forestry has not been seen as a priority. It has diminished, and to the extent forestry comes up as an issue or something that gets discussed, it really has been more on the environmental aspects of it.
Mhm.
Those of you that aren't familiar, we've gone through our old growth deferral, this question about how we should be managing forest lands. We've gone, we're in this sort of engaged in these exercises to, it's kind of like planning, but it's not really like planning, to try and better get these sort of other values on the landscape. And then reconciliation has been a priority for the current government, which was just reelected. And so forestry kind of comes up with these other dimensions and the kind of, which kind of, I guess overshadows perhaps some of these other fundamental questions that need to be thought about, whether it's the economic feasibility, if you're going to be doing different management practices, what those look like, what you might need to support it. And I think that's something that we'll probably be tackling as the entire project, and definitely within theme 5, to understand when we look across the landscape of Canada, is what we're seeing here in BC something similar that you see in Alberta or other provinces? I mean, I guess I would just offer, even if it's not a political priority, part of this is the kind of, I guess, what's the health of what's going on? Like, how are things going within the various provinces? Where are the pressure points and where are the issues? And to what extent can what we do in this project help us understand either how to relieve it or better kind of get better outcomes, even if that might not be a top government priority. But at least, we might be able to go to them and say, hey, look, here's a solution. Here's a different way of going about it that even if it's not top of mind for you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. It's nice to hear some, optimism. And I guess even though all the changes aren't, disaster related, like, towns burning down, they'll certainly do put the issues on the map for the public as well. So.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any final questions for Harry? All right. If not, then we'll conclude there. So thank you so much for Harry for presenting about theme 5. If anyone wants to rewatch the presentation, it's on our YouTube channel. Actually, I'll send that out after this is all done, once it's posted. So yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and yeah, thanks again, Harry.
Shortest webinar ever. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks everybody that take the time, and look forward to hearing from you and meeting you or talking to you at some point in the future, probably. Okay.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye now.